What is the most well-known fraud story in history? If you think it is a fraud story involving gold, oil, or Wall Street stocks, you are mistaken. Postage stamps? Yes, you heard that right. The most famous fraud story in history was about postage stamps. This simple story deceived thousands of people who wanted to get rich with the promise of easy money, wiped out millions of dollars, and became the namesake of every scam that followed. Today, we generally call these Ponzi schemes, but about 100 years ago, this was simply a deal offered by Mr. Ponzi. Imagine this. People are waiting in long lines on the streets, handing over all their savings to Mr. Ponzi. To understand this, you also need to understand what it felt like to live in that era. Imagine a world where news spreads through whispers in the streets. In this world, everyone is talking about one man. There is a man at the center of the rumors, and this man doubles your money. Immigrants chasing the American dream, and people who set aside their logic so they wouldn't miss the opportunity to get rich quickly. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Welcome to The Money Behind History, a place where the hidden details of money, power, and history are discussed. Here you will discover a world where nothing is as simple as it seems. The man at the center of our story is Charles Ponzi, an immigrant who came from Italy to the United States in 1903 with only $250 in his pocket. In his early years in America, Ponzi drifted from one short-term job to another, jumping from one adventure to the next. Although he attempted various ventures, most of them ended in failure. Left penniless, Charles Ponzi was caught during illegal activities such as check fraud and migrant smuggling, and he even served time in prison. Looking at this part of the story so far, Charles Ponzi was not involved in particularly safe businesses. In short, he was a con man. However, he had a very high power of persuasion and a personality that could easily influence others. When people are desperate, hope can blind them. Ponzi knew this very well and used it to his advantage. As the calendar showed 1919, World War I had ended, millions of people had died due to the Spanish flu, and countless immigrants had come to the United States dreaming of a new life. It was almost impossible to find someone who was not desperate. In Boston, where Ponzi lived, there were many Italian, Irish, and Eastern European immigrants with completely empty pockets. In the post-war years, the stock market was on the rise. However, this meant very little to the working class. They were focused on getting through the day by working in factories and at docks. Then it began to be talked about in the streets of Boston that there was a man who could turn $100 into $150 in just about a month and a half. The environment was perfectly suited for people to listen to this story. Charles Ponzi's offer was simple enough for everyone to understand. Those who listened thought he was a genius and began to feel hopeful. He told investors about a loophole he had discovered in the international postal system. After the war, currency exchange rates were highly volatile. Simply put, you could collect international reply coupons at a low price. These were coupons used to prepay the return postage of letters. You would find the country where these coupons were cheap, buy them there, and then exchange them in the United States for higher-priced U.S. stamps. He called this arbitrage, a risk-free return method where you could profit from exchange rate differences. If you didn't understand what I just explained, that was not a problem. For those who didn't understand Ponzi's system, There was only one thing on their minds. If you give your money to Ponzi, you earn 50% in 45 days, and you double it in 90 days. That was the only sentence people cared about. This rumor began to spread from ear to ear. A shopkeeper who gave Ponzi $10 told his customers that he received $15 6 weeks later. Another person gave Ponzi $100 and got $150 in return, then went and told a friend. Every whisper made the system grow even larger. People gathered their savings and invested them with Ponzi. The system was growing like an avalanche. No one cared about the details. The only thing on everyone's mind was getting rich. Could someone who saw ordinary people like themselves getting rich really afford to miss this opportunity? Of course not. Ponzi no longer needed to advertise. His investors were doing it better than he ever could. By 1920, long lines formed in front of Ponzi's office, and people were competing with each other just to hand over their cash. As Ponzi's fame spread beyond Boston, he opened offices in other cities as well. At the peak of the system, he was collecting $1 million in cash every day. You can calculate what that amount would be worth today. He was now being referred to as a financial wizard, and newspapers portrayed him as a genius who had outsmarted the global system. So, what was the problem? The loophole Ponzi claimed to have found was actually an illusion. Charles Ponzi never purchased as many coupons as he claimed. In fact, there weren't even that many coupons available on the market. So what was he doing? Ponzi was paying earlier investors with the money he received from new investors. In other words, he was clearly defrauding people. But the strange part was this. Even he believed the system would work. Mathematics does not lie. Calculations are always clear. Yet Ponzi claimed that he believed he could change the math. The system, which seemed to be working, turned into a deeper pit as more people invested. And people were completely unaware of it. Investors who multiplied their money with high returns believed they were part of a system that worked better than the banking system. Until it collapsed, they weren't entirely wrong. In less than a year, Ponzi became a phenomenon. He was called a financial wizard and was seen as a symbol of the American dream by people waiting at his door with bags full of money. And they were right, because they truly received much more money than they had invested. But as the pit grew deeper, mathematics had already started flashing danger signals. When investigators examined the system, the dark picture emerged. For Ponzi to make these payments, he would have needed hundreds of millions of coupons. However, there were only about 30,000 coupons in circulation. Ponzi was not buying coupons. He was circulating the money he took from people and handing it to others. As people began to overcome the blindness created by greed and started questioning the system, dissenting voices began to emerge. Financial analyst Clarence Barron, the founder of Barron's and No Fool, was the first to throw a stone at Ponzi. If such a clear opportunity existed, why had no one in Europe noticed it before? And why was there no competitor? Why wasn't Ponzi investing his own money into his brilliant plan? If you could double your money every 90 days, why would you need anyone else's money? Soon after, other newspapers and magazines also began publishing articles questioning Ponzi. Regulatory authorities in the United States took action. Investigations confirmed that Charles Ponzi had not purchased enough coupons to support the repayments. Banks began warning investors. These warnings created an anxious crowd. But Ponzi had already gone too deep to climb back out. The system had grown too large. Still, Ponzi was a lucky man. People continued to give him money thinking, what if the rumors are false? Or what if those who leave the system miss a huge opportunity? People entered this system out of fear of missing out. And when the ship began to sink, they refused to get off for the very same reason. That was the psychology that kept the system alive. For them, there was no turning back. So what was Charles Ponzi doing during all this? On one hand, he was enjoying life in his ultra-luxurious mansion in Massachusetts. On the other hand, he was desperately struggling to keep the system alive. He was asking banks for loans to keep the transfers between accounts going and paying journalists to write positive stories about him. But even if he had received the loans he wanted, it would have been impossible to keep the system alive, because the system was like a building constructed on a faulty foundation. When the audits were completed, financial analyst Clarence Barron was proven right. It was documented that Ponzi had not purchased the number of coupons he claimed. With only about 30,000 coupons in circulation, Ponzi would have needed to purchase more than 160 million coupons to pay the amounts he promised. The investors who had refused to leave the sinking ship now began to jump. Panicked investors were lining up not to invest, but to get their money back. Ponzi began making the requested payments to show that the system was still functioning. But remember what I said. Mathematics does not lie. After a short time, there was no money left to pay investors. The system completely collapsed. August 11th, 1920, went down in history as the day Charles Ponzi was arrested. This event caused massive destruction in the market. The total amount invested was around $20 million. More than $200 million when adjusted to today's value. While most of the money vanished into thin air, thousands of families lost everything in their dream of getting rich. Ponzi's arrest did not only mark his end, it destroyed the dreams and hopes of those who believed in him. In court, Ponzi defended his system and said he was not a fraudster, and ironically, he believed it. After serving only a few years in prison, he was released. But even after his release, he continued to scam people. He moved to Florida and tried to establish new systems and persuade people once again. Each time he failed and completely lost his credibility. He was deported back to his home country, Italy. He later drifted to Brazil. In the final years of his life, he was poor, ill, and forgotten. He died in a charity hospital in 1949. He died, but his name did not. On the contrary, it became immortal. Today, every scam where money from new participants is used to pay older participants is called a Ponzi scheme. Interestingly, Ponzi was neither the first nor the last person to run such a scam. But he succeeded in giving his name to it. Ponzi was not a mathematical genius, but he understood human psychology very well and realized what greed could make people do. No one cared about the postage coupons, and he knew it. Even though Ponzi's fraud system became widely known, people did not learn their lesson. In 2008, a man named Bernie Madoff managed to carry out the largest Ponzi scheme in history. He took billions of dollars from investors, charities, and celebrities. Madoff's system was even simpler than Ponzi's. Regardless of market conditions, he promised steady monthly returns. Bankers, investment professionals, fund managers, and many others believed these promises and invested their money because they did not want to miss the opportunity. But remember, mathematics does not lie. Even today, similar systems continue to be promoted. They all promise high returns, but end in disappointment. Yet every new Ponzi scheme finds investors who believe in it, because, as Ponzi knew very well, no one cares about the coupons. No one cares about the system. The only thing everyone focuses on is getting rich quickly. So the issue is not the system. It is psychology. Ponzi's fraud story, which went down in world history, should never be forgotten. Using human psychology, he drew thousands of investors into a system with no solid foundation. He cleverly took the money of people who ran toward him out of fear of missing out. That is why we must learn from this story. Is a guaranteed investment really that guaranteed? Can a company that promises profit without risk truly make you money? Are stocks that seem impossible to fall really impossible to fall? Acting out of fear of missing out can prevent us from seeing the answers to these questions. If someone whispers opportunities like these into your ear, remember the crowds waiting in front of Ponzi's office in Boston with envelopes full of cash. And a Ponzi scheme always ends the same way. A few get rich, most are ruined, and the system survives on your hope until the day it collapses. If this story gave you a new perspective, please like the video and subscribe. On this channel, I will tell you the story behind the money.